Hi, David Mould here. You see these shots on your screen? They're of the destruction of San Francisco in the earthquake of 1906. Now what I'm about to share with you I've written about in our newsletters and actually alluded to in one or two of our videos going back at least a decade. After watching several hours of CNN recently about President Biden dropping out of the presidential race and the ascendancy of Vice President Kamala Harris, the subject of San Francisco's destruction started to itch my soul again. Let me tell you why. But first, the backdrop. My interest in San Francisco began after reading eyewitness accounts of that city's destruction in that 1906 earthquake. We'll get to some of these accounts in a minute. For now, let me share with you where this interest led me. In 2005, it led me to the National Archives in Washington, D.C. to procure the best shots I could get of the aftermath of that earthquake. This wasn't my first time there. At the time, I was also interested in shots of the Holocaust, so I'd end up spending several hours on this trip just digging, researching, and selecting whatever shots I wanted. Here's the old attaché case that I toted with me up to Washington. Old, beat up, raggedy, but I found it, and the pictures I used are still inside here. Some of the pictures on your screen. Of course, you can get these shots online today, but back then I knew nothing about the internet and went about securing those shots the old-fashioned way. Here's the bill, it's on your screen. Not for the shots themselves, which are in the public domain and are therefore free. This is the bill for copying them. That said, what stoked my interest to begin with? Books. I'd become intrigued by first-hand accounts of the destruction that I'd read about in a couple books, not the least of which is this one, Life Sketches of Ellen White. This one. 4 years before the earthquake, Mrs. White, an avid evangelist, had written this. Well-equipped tent meetings should be held in the large cities such as San Francisco, for not long hence these cities will suffer under the judgments of God. San Francisco and Oakland are becoming as Sodom and Gomorrah, and the Lord will visit them in wrath. That's what she predicted. San Francisco and Oakland are becoming as Sodom and Gomorrah, the two cities destroyed by God in Genesis 19, and the Lord will visit them in wrath. In what? She said wrath. Then, 2 days before the earthquake, she also penned the following. That's 2 days. While at Loma Linda, California, April 16, 1906, there passed before me a most wonderful representation. During a vision of the night, I stood on an eminence from which I could see houses shaken like a reed in the wind. Buildings, great and small, were falling to the ground. Pleasure resorts, theaters, hotels, and the homes of the wealthy were shaken and shattered. Many lives were blotted out of existence, and the air was filled with the shrieks of the injured and the terrified. The destroying angels of God were at work. One touch, and buildings so thoroughly constructed that men regarded them as secure against every danger quickly became heaps of rubbish. There was no assurance of safety in any place. I did not feel in any special peril, but the awfulness of the scenes that passed before me I cannot find words to describe. It seemed that the forbearance of God was exhausted and that the judgment day had come. The angel that stood by my side then instructed me that but few have any conception of the wickedness existing in our world today, and especially the wickedness in the large cities. He declared that the Lord has appointed a time when he will visit transgressors in wrath for persistent disregard of his law. Yeah, that's from the same book, Life Sketches of Ellen White, page 407. Then there was this account, which I got from a book written by her grandson. Here he reflects upon Mrs. White's tour of San Francisco after the earthquake and combines it with details of what happened while the earthquake was rolling. Monday, the group set out for San Francisco. At Palo Alto, they saw the wreckage of Stanford University. When they arrived at San Francisco, they hired a horse-drawn cab to spend an hour and a half touring the ruined city. With Ellen White was her son W.C. and two women, Mae Walling and Carolyn Chrysler, wife of Clarence Chrysler, her chief secretary. As they rode together, a good many things were recounted. Exactly what was said, we do not know, but various and sundry reports give us a composite picture of what took place. The quake came at 5:31 Wednesday morning, April 18. The first casualty was the Point Arena Lighthouse, 90 miles to the north. The huge lenses and lantern exploded in a shower of glass. Earth waves 2 and 3 feet high were seen plunging south at an incredible rate. Giant redwoods were mowed down, beaches were raised and lowered, and trains derailed. At one ranch, the earth opened directly beneath an unsuspecting cow. With a bellow of terror, the animal plunged into the gaping hole, its cry cut short as the crevice clamped shut, leaving only a twitching tail visible. That's from G. Thomas and M. Witt's The San Francisco Earthquake. He's quoting them. I'll tell you this, that twitching cow's tail has always fascinated me. But he goes on. The city was largely asleep as the wave of earth upheaval struck San Francisco in a 28-second tremor just at dawn. First, there was a terrifying roar, and then stone and bricks began to fall like rain from taller buildings. Chimneys toppled from almost every home. The streets heaved and dropped in places as much as 30 feet. The second floor of some buildings became the first floor. Walls of brick fell into the streets, leaving rooms on every floor supported only by the inner wooden framework. Clocks fell from mantels, pictures from walls, wardrobes and dish cupboards fell on their faces, beds, tables and chairs careened helplessly. In seconds, people were on the streets, many barefoot and in their night clothes. Telephone and electric lines, stretched and broken by toppling power poles, were tangled on the streets. Gas lines throughout the city were twisted and broken. A group of uniformed policemen starting out on duty was practically annihilated as collapsing masonry buildings pinned them to the ground. For a minute, the earth heaved, slid, broke open, and convulsed. Screams of the injured, terrified, and dying pierced the air. You get the picture. So that's what drew me to Washington and the National Archives. But what is it that's prompting me to make this video today? What is it that's prompting me to implicate San Francisco in the emergence of an American theocracy? Friend, I'm making this video today because I believe history could be about to repeat itself. There's just this itch in my soul that's telling me, make this video and make it quickly. Make it before the things you're about to talk about overtake you and make it impossible for you to write anything. That's the sense of urgency I have today. Now, this isn't the first time I've experienced what I call a spiritual itch. Let me tell you about two times when that itch actually came out in our newsletter. The first had to do with the Titanic, and the second was the attempted assassination of President Trump on July 13, 2024. Let's start with the Titanic. Back in 2023 on July 18, out of the blue, I'd felt impressed to use the sinking of the Titanic as an object lesson in stubbornness. Her captain had been warned about icebergs in the water but didn't take sufficient evasive action. And this is what I wrote. The other day, we used the term American nationalism as we attempted to fathom the resistance in some circles to the idea that American democracy could ever be overcome, let alone overcome by a church. Some truths are just too hard to swallow, I suppose. The Titanic wasn't supposed to sink either. In fact, her captain, Edward John Smith, reportedly claimed even God himself couldn't sink this ship. What do we say then to those who refuse to believe America is the second beast of Revelation 13, who causeth all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and bond, to receive a mark in their right hand or in their foreheads, and that no man might buy or sell save he that had the mark or the name of the beast or the number of his name? That's Revelation 13, 16, and 17. Are they not making the Titanic's mistake? What you just saw is what we'd written on June 18th, 2023. Notice the title of the newsletter, Visiting the Titanic. There's nothing particularly remarkable about that title, is there? Well, not so fast, for there was definitely something remarkable, both about the title, Visiting the Titanic, and the content of the newsletter itself. How was I to know, even as we were writing these lines in 2023, that a submersible, the Titan, with 5 human beings on board, was prepping to make a fatal dive of its own? Friend, the Titanic sank in 1912. For decades, people could only dream of finding it. Then in 1985, after only a week of searching with deep-sea sonar and cameras, a joint French and American team found her 400 miles off the coast of Newfoundland, Canada, 2.5 miles underwater. After that, no doubt spurred by the find, the movie Titanic was released in 1997. After decades of hearing nothing more about the sunken ship, who put it on my brain the week before that submersible started her dive? Who put it on my brain? Friend, the proof of what I'm saying is in this newsletter with the date there for the world to see. This was published before the submersible began its dive and before the media all over the globe, I suspect, began resurrecting the unsinkable ship. You could say we were ahead of the game by about a week. How come? God only knows. For that was an itch I didn't even feel. I just felt impressed to write about the Titanic. Remember I said there were 2 itches? The second was connected with the attack upon former President Trump. Here it is in a nutshell.
Take a look at what happened.
A year after writing about the Titanic, it was actually a year almost to the day later, I felt impressed to write about the assassination of a high-ranking friend of the MAGA movement. Here's what I had written. Assassination. Over the past 2 weeks, I mentioned assassination as a predictable part of the devil's playbook in these last days. Is it that my mind is just so gory? Not at all. It's just that, like C.S. Lewis, author of the Screwtape Letters, I'm trying to put myself in the devil's shoes and imagine what I would do to speed up the ultimate success of the MAGA movement. Beyond tornadoes and earthquakes, etc., what would Satan do for an encore? Why? Assassinate at least one high-profile friend of the MAGA movement, of course. That dastardly deed would boost conspiracy theories about the deep state into real extraterrestrial orbit, wouldn't it? And above all, hasten the day when this country is ripped apart by civil war. My friend, I heard no voices when we penned either of these newsletters, nor felt any angels directing my mind. But the fact remains, when we penned the second one, not one of those 8 bullets unleashed upon President Trump had yet been fired. for this was 27 days before the attempted assassination. It's sort of eerie looking back at it now, but here's what I'd written in the 2 paragraphs preceding that quote about the assassination. Here's what I'd written. Friend, if the Spirit of God has had anything to do with the things I've written, then believe me when I say that something's going to happen that will push the MAGA movement into the stratosphere. What still might seem like a fringe movement to many of the know-it-alls in the media will, I suspect, morph into the dominant political voice in this nation before too long. And it will happen just as soon as God gives Satan permission to strike this land, just as he did with the patriarch Job. See Job 1. Something is going to happen, I said, but what? I didn't know. I didn't know what was going to happen, but in the next paragraph I found myself writing about the assassination of a prominent MAGA member. How was I supposed to know former President Trump would be attacked? I didn't, for like I said, this was 27 days before the event. All I was trying to do was conjure up a scenario that would catapult the MAGA movement into the stratosphere, which, if my study of the Bible and last day events was accurate, I was certain was going to happen. Well, where did that certainty come from? It came about because of what's written in the Bible about the emergence of a theocracy in America. You heard me right? I said theocracy. Let's look at that word. For those of you who might not know what it means, it's a form of government where religious authorities are in control of the state. In Iran, for example, that would be the Ayatollahs. In America, that would be the church. Is this the first you're hearing this? Why am I not surprised? Well, that's pretty much what the Bible says is coming to America, particularly when it comes to worship on Sunday. Can I prove this? Yes, I can. Friend, I can't tell you whether President Trump is in the Bible or not, but I can tell you about America's coming theocracy. In fact, there's a documentary series that we're working on right now entitled Finding America in Bible Prophecy, and that's where we prove that America is in here, in the Bible, for all the world to see. By the way, if your pastor hasn't mentioned this subject to you, it's because he or she doesn't know. Most think of the book of Revelation as an undecipherable book anyway. But what's the testimony of its author? Come, open your Bible with me and let's read the introduction to this book together. Here it is. The revelation of Jesus Christ, which God gave unto him to show unto his servants things which must shortly come to pass. That's Revelation 1:1. Let's summarize. What have we just read? This book, the last book in the Bible, the book of Revelation, is a book authored by God the Father himself. Who is it sent to? It's sent to us, his servants. By whom? By his Son, Jesus Christ. Through dreams and visions and the gift of prophecy, God wanted his followers to know, long before they happen, things the world will never know and never see until it bursts upon them. To be sure, he's opened these secrets to us, not that we might keep them to ourselves. Far from it. We're under the most solemn obligation to share them with the world. Frankly, that's why I'm making this video today. How can those of us who can prove from the Bible that America is to radically change before the return of our Lord simply sit still and say nothing about it? How can we sit still as we see this country that God raised up about to be eviscerated from the inside? I said, how can we sit still as we see our beloved First Amendment, the key bulwark against theocracy? How can we sit still as we see it about to be trashed, repudiated, and thrown on the trash heap of history. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. Beloved, this is the wisdom handed down to us not merely by Washington, Adams, Jefferson, Madison, and the delegates to the Constitutional Convention of 1787. This is the wisdom bequeathed to them by their parents and their parents' parents who endured the horrors of European theocracy for 1260 years. Why do you think the Mayflower was chartered? The Pilgrims will tell you it was to get away from the union of church and state that prevailed in England. Here in America, they wanted none of it. They'd heard enough about Bloody Mary and the burning of so-called heretics like Latimer, Ridley, and Cranmer at Oxford. They'd heard enough about John Huss and Jerome. They'd heard enough about Wycliffe. They'd heard about these martyrs. Having escaped to America, they'd heard also of the imprisonment of the likes of Bunyan, jailed for his faith 40 years after they fled. Is this what we really want to establish in America today? A return to inquisitorial justice? By that I mean a return to the rack, the stake, and waterboarding? Will not God hold those of us who know this prophecy of Revelation 13 guilty if we say nothing, even as we see it coming to pass? Beloved, from what I can see online and on the television screen, there are millions of well-meaning people caught up in this push to make America Christian. The tragedy is these don't have a clue that the end results of their most patriotic energies were foreseen and described in the Bible 2,000 years ago as an utter disaster. People won't be able to buy or sell who oppose this theocracy, and many will be killed as a result of it. So no, we dare not keep these things to ourselves. How did Jesus put it? Go ye therefore and teach all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Ghost. Matthew 28:19. Teach, Jesus said. Teach. In Matthew 4:16, the Bible describes the effect of Christ coming to our earth as a glorious spiritual sunrise. Here it is. The people which sat in darkness saw great light, and to them which sat in the region and shadow of death, light is sprung up. That's Matthew 4:16. Light, my friend, light. God intends not only for the world to come out of darkness, He intends for professed Christians to come out of darkness too. That's why He gave us the gift of prophecy. Listen to Him. Remember the former things of old, for I am God, and there is none else. I am God, and there is none like me, declaring the end from the beginning and from ancient times the things that are not yet done, saying, my counsel shall stand, and I will do all my pleasure. That's Isaiah 46:9 and 10. Declaring the end from the beginning and from ancient times the things that are not yet done. Did you get that? What is God saying? He's saying, will tell you things that will happen before they come to pass. By the way, Islam doesn't have this, for there's not one word of prophecy in their most sacred book, the Quran. Think about that. But that's a subject for another study. Bottom line, this is what the God of Israel, the God of the Bible, is saying through his prophet Isaiah. I will show you. I will reveal to you things to come before they happen. And that's all the proof you will ever need that I, Jehovah, am the only true God. That's what he's saying. And that's precisely what he has done in Revelation 13. He's given us the future of America almost 2,000 years before it comes to pass. My friend, I assure you, America is in here. She's in chapter 13 of the last book of the Bible, the book of Revelation, and she's depicted as a lamb-like beast that will yet speak as a dragon. You know the best way to think about this? Consider what I've just said to you about this symbol, the lamb-like beast, to be more like a prosecutor's opening argument in a criminal trial. This is the broad picture, the broad claim that I'm making this morning. America is in the Bible, but it is in our series, Finding America in Bible Prophecy, that the absolute, irrefutable, incontrovertible proof of our claim is found. Let me give you a synopsis. Revelation 13 tells us what's coming upon America just before Christ returns, and it involves the repudiation of our Constitution. I can hear some of you already saying, where is that, Brother Mould? I don't see that in chapter 13. I know that. What you see is the following. And he had power to give life unto the image of the beast, that the image of the beast should both speak, and cause that as many as would not worship the image of the beast should be killed. And he causeth all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and bond, to receive a mark in their right hand or in their foreheads, and that no man might buy or sell save he that had the mark, or the name of the beast, or the number of his name. That's Revelation 13, 15 to 17. That's what you see. While interpreting these very verses, the same Mrs. White who predicted the San Francisco earthquake 4 years before it occurred, and who saw it in a vision on April 16th, 2 days before the city was leveled, penned these lines in this book in my hands. This volume, volume 5 of a 9-volume set of what's known as Testimonies for the Church, contains material initially published between 1882 and 1889. Here's what we find on page 452. Our country shall repudiate every principle of its constitution as a Protestant and Republican government. That's page 452. That's part of what she had to say while commenting on Revelation 13. Now, Mrs. White never claimed to understand everything in the Bible, but Revelation 13 she knew backward and forward. I said America in the Bible, she knew backward and forward, and wrote about it for all the world to read. I'm taking my time here, my friends, because frankly, I believe it's going to take a prophet to guide us to an accurate understanding of this prophecy. A prophet to put a pause, if possible, to the mad rush of honest, well-meaning, Bible-believing citizens determined to make America Christian. And I'm not a prophet, not by any means. So back to what she said about the repudiation of America's Constitution. And you know, it's not so much about what she said. If she's to be believed, it's about what the Lord saw fit to teach her, first from His Word, then in dreams and visions of the night about what's coming upon America. You know, I'm actually quite wrong. I'm wrong about that, for some of her visions happened in broad daylight in front of many witnesses. Bottom line, she says quite a bit more in this book in my hands, The Great Controversy, published first in 1888. Here she is on page 592. Listen to this. Political corruption is destroying love of justice and regard for truth. And even in free America, rulers and legislators, in order to secure public favor, will yield to the popular demand for a law enforcing Sunday observance. Liberty of conscience, which has cost so great a sacrifice, will no longer be respected. In the soon coming conflict, we shall see exemplified the prophet's words. The dragon was wroth with the woman, and went to make war with the remnant of her seed, which keep the commandments of God, and have the testimony of Jesus Christ. That's Revelation 12:17. And that's from this book, The Great Controversy, page 592. Did you notice that? political corruption destroying love of justice and regard for truth. Political what, my friend? Political corruption. It's almost like she was writing in our day, isn't it? But this was written first in 1888, and quite frankly, I think even before that in some of the earlier testimonies. One more for you. Here she is again from the same book. The lamb-like horns and dragon voice of the symbol point to a striking contradiction between the professions and the practice of the nation thus represented. The speaking of the nation is the action of its legislative and judicial authorities. By such action it will give the lie to those liberal and peaceful principles which it has put forth as the foundation of its policy. The prediction that it will speak as a dragon and exercise all the power of the first beast plainly foretells a development of the spirit of intolerance and persecution that was manifested by the nations represented by the dragon and the leopard-like beast. And the statement that the beast with two horns causeth the earth and them which dwell therein to worship the first beast indicates that the authority of this nation is to be exercised in enforcing some observance which shall be an act of homage to the papacy. Such action would be directly contrary to the principles of its government, to the genius of its free institutions, to the direct and solemn avowals of the Declaration of Independence, and to the Constitution. The founders of the nation wisely sought to guard against the employment of secular power on the part of the church, with its inevitable result, intolerance and persecution. The Constitution provides that Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, and that no religious test shall ever be required as a qualification to any office or public trust under the United States. Only in flagrant violation of these safeguards to the nation's liberty can any religious observance be enforced by civil authority. But the inconsistency of such action is no greater than is represented in the symbol. It is the beast with lamb-like horns, in profession pure, gentle, and harmless, that speaks as a dragon. That's Great Controversy, page 442. How do we keep this to ourselves? That's impossible. So how do we jump from this to the attempted assassination of President Trump? Let me connect the dots for you. First of all, I trust we all realize by now that there are spiritual forces working intensely in our world. How does the Bible put it? For we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of the darkness of this world, against spiritual wickedness in high places, Ephesians 6:12. Behind the scenes, where our natural eyes cannot penetrate, there are angelic forces fighting to this day. Satan and his fallen angels on the one hand, Christ and his loyal angels on the other. You see this in Job, where a complaining Satan virtually spits the following words in God's face: Hast not thou made an hedge about him, and about his house, and about all that he hath on every side? That's Job 1:10. You see it also in Daniel. Here's what we read there, coming out of the mouth of an angel. But the prince of the kingdom of Persia withstood me 21 days. But lo, Michael, one of the chief princes, came to help me, and I remained there with the kings of Persia. That's Daniel 10:13. Behind the scenes, heavenly battles. A hedge about Job, evidently to protect him from the attacks of the evil one, which became as plain as day once that hedge was removed. And in Daniel, an angel who was withstood or opposed and had to rely on Michael the archangel or chief messenger of God for help. No, I'm not God. But having said all that we have about the repudiation of America's Constitution, let me tell you what I think was going on in that attack on President Trump.
Take a look at what happened.
That assassination attempt was straight out of Satan's playbook. Though it did take a life, it was never intended to kill the former president. By that I mean, while the shooter no doubt clearly intended to kill him, the demons who inspired the attack and who had control of the whole scene as far as God permitted them, I believe those demons had other ideas. It's sort of like what we find in the book of Proverbs. Note the dichotomy. A man's heart deviseth his way, Solomon said, but the Lord directs his steps. You mightn't get what I'm saying now, particularly about unseen angels, wicked angels and their power and activity behind the scenes, but you think about that verse. That's what I believe was going on, a spiritual battle second to none. How do you shoot the ear but miss the head? Easy, if behind the scenes those bullets are being guided by some of the same demons who struck Job. No, I believe that what looked like an assassination attempt was nothing but Satan's attempt to stir up the MAGA base to heights never before reached. It was intended to generate a massive sympathy vote and to produce a landslide victory in the November presidential election, thus paving the way for Satan's masterpiece, a full-blown theocracy in America. I don't know about anybody else, but I've been looking at this prophecy ever since I first read about it 50 years ago. How is Satan going to pull this off? How is he going to bring about a theocracy in America? I can remember being on a telecast in Jamaica a decade or so ago and being mocked by the host, who, after I told his audience that they could look for a theocracy to emerge in America, just about laughed me to scorn. Back in 2016, I even made an ad in which we predicted this coming theocracy. We couldn't afford American TV, but we played it in Jamaica for a few days. You want to see it? Sure, I'll show you. Here it is. Hi, David Mould here. Some of you still in shock over the Trump victory. Let me politely address Ambassador Moreno and the U.S. Embassy staff. The State Department won't tell you this because they don't know. But according to the Bible, there are more shocks ahead. Let your colleagues know. Let the president know. Most of us would probably live to see a theocracy emerge right there in the United States. Theocracy? Yes, with the church in control of the state. On Religious Hard Talk next Tuesday night, I'll tell you more. I may have been laughed to scorn on that telecast publicly, and maybe even privately after running that ad, but now with Project 25 hanging in the balance, it's not so fanciful anymore, is it? For Satan to absolutely succeed though, two things needed to be in place, and they are in place today. He needed first an unsuspecting political movement, adamant on the point that America must be ruled by Christians. Though in their graves today, this was virtually the position of Christian leaders like Jerry Falwell and Pat Robertson, many of whose ideological comrades rallied to the call and helped swell the coalition that stormed Congress on January 6, 2021. Number two, Satan he not only needed that political movement, he also needed the subversion of the Supreme Court. Let me say that again. If America is to move completely away from our Constitution as we know it, Satan needed the subversion of the Supreme Court. Frankly, over 30 years ago, we got a pretty good warning that that subversion was well underway. Writing in 1990 in this book on your screen, The Tempting of America, Judge Robert Bork made it plain what was going on in his day. The forces that would break law to a tame instrument of a particular political thrust are past midway in a long march through our institutions. They have overrun a number of law schools, including a large majority of America's most prestigious, where the lawyers and judges of the future are being trained. They have an increasing voice in our politics and in Congress. But the focus of the struggle, the commanding height sought to be taken, as indeed it partially has been, is control of the courts and the Constitution. The Constitution, or the law we call constitutional, they are by no means identical, is the highest prize, and control of the selection of judges is the last step on the path to that prize. Why? Because the Constitution is the trump card in American politics, and judges decide what the Constitution means. When the Supreme Court invokes the Constitution, whether legitimately or not, as to that issue, the democratic process is at an end. That's The Tempting of America, page 3. Friend, Professor Bork wrote this in 1990, which is what made the Supreme Court ruling on July 1st, 2024 about presidential immunity so ominous. Clearly, the subversion of the court is now a fait accompli. In her dissent on that watershed ruling, Justice Sonia Sotomayor virtually declared that her Catholic brethren on the court had created a king above the law. Surely the MAGA movement was now on firmer footing too, but to my mind it still needs something more to push it into the stratosphere, beyond the reach of human hands. That said, on July 21st, 8 days after the attack, we continued. In and of itself, I believe this attack has done much to push the MAGA movement into the stratosphere, as I depicted it in that newsletter of June 16. However, unless I'm completely misreading the promptings of the Spirit of God, I still believe there's a truly apocalyptic or semi-apocalyptic tragedy headed for America, possibly even before Election Day. Sent from the devil himself, this event, whatever it is, won't be merely for the MAGA base. This one will be to spread panic across the entire nation, thus making it a whole lot easier to A, sell the argument that God is angry with America, and B, implement Project 2025, which I believe it will be seen has a hidden Sunday law component built in. So, something else is coming. Of this I'm certain. As I said, I don't know what it is, and I don't know where Satan will strike. But once again, my mind is drawn towards San Francisco. As I wrote in that same newsletter in which I had mentioned assassinations, I still stand by what I've written. That is, that an event of the magnitude of the San Francisco earthquake of 1906 would not merely spook America, it would also set pulpits ablaze with a catastrophic but predictable round of finger pointing. It's the abortions. It's the queer lifestyle. It's the desecration of Sunday. That's what's caused it. Can't you hear it coming? The only way to avoid more punishment is to return to God. That's what I'm pretty sure is coming, and if I'm correct in what I believe about all our planet having is 6,000 years, it could come as swiftly as tomorrow morning. Well, there you have it. That's the backdrop. Now, why do I suspect that whatever is coming is going to involve San Francisco? 2 reasons. On January 1st, 1909, almost 3 years after San Francisco's destruction, Mrs. White penned this line to her friend Josephine Gotzian. I feel sure that San Francisco and Oakland will again be visited with the judgments of God. That's January 1st, 1909. So even in her mind, almost 3 years after the earthquake, she felt God wasn't through with San Francisco. There were more judgments to come. The next reason is something that hit me within hours of President Biden having bowed out of the presidential race. San Francisco. Isn't this where Kamala Harris served as the city's 27th district attorney? San Francisco. Isn't this where she oversaw the same-sex marriage of Bradley Witherspoon and Raymond Cabone on February 14, 2004, during a 29-day period in which then Mayor Gavin Newsom permitted same-sex couples to obtain marriage licenses? If some future destruction of San Francisco could be sold as an act of vengeance from a God angry and insulted over same-sex marriage, wouldn't it provide trainloads of high-octane fodder for pastors and Christian leaders across America to point to as a terrible example of what the entire country could expect under the leadership of the Democratic Party? In short, wouldn't they be able to point to a destroyed San Francisco as indicative of more punishment to come from a God angry with the Kamala Harrises and Gavin Newsoms of this world? Can't you hear preachers all across America singing this song? I hear it as plain as day in my head. Friend, I'm thinking like a devil today. I'm trying to expose what I believe is Satan's playbook for getting his theocracy in place so that his false Sabbath can be imposed by force. All that I've said to you about San Francisco is, of course, speculation on my part. While I'm not claiming any prophetic gift, the scenes that I've outlined constitute the type of scenario that I believe will push the MAGA movement truly into the stratosphere beyond anything the attempted assassination of President Trump came close to doing. Can't you hear it? If what's on your screen, what happened in 1906 happened again, I'm telling you, the Democrats and their support for abortion and the LGBTQ movement are going to be blamed. If it happens before Election Day 2024, it'll be a landslide victory for the Republican Party and the MAGA movement, guaranteed. If it comes after the elections, regardless of who's in power, it's still going to spark massive finger-pointing and several hasty attempts to appease an offended God with legislation. Friend, this is just me, David Mould, trying to do my best C.S. Lewis impersonation again. Yes, I'm trying to think like a devil. For those of you who know C.S. Lewis, that's what he did when he published the Screwtape Letters in 1942. He thought like a devil. Back on June 16, 2024, that's what I was doing when I wrote about the assassination of a highly placed friend of the MAGA movement. I thought like a devil and speculated about what Satan would do for an encore. And that's what I'm doing today. In reminding you about the San Francisco earthquake of 1906, I'm trying to think like a devil who knows his time has come. His time not just to unleash signs and wonders and unbelievable havoc across the globe, but his time to create the very theocracy he's desired for America ever since this nation drafted a constitution that kept church and state separate. Yes, Satan hates that establishment clause. If he's to succeed, my friend, that clause has got to go. As for what kind of theocracy his will be, I mean, after all, it could be a mild one, couldn't it? Not this one. Here's Revelation 13:15. And he had power to give life unto the image of the beast, that the image of the beast should both speak and cause that as many as would not worship the image of the beast should be killed. Revelation 13:15. There is death coming for those who defy this theocracy, my friend. According to Mrs. White, and we actually put her statements about it in a 6-page Time magazine ad back in 1990. According to her, there'll be civil penalties at first, but then, as the Bible makes plain, it will be death for those who refuse to yield to the coming laws about Sunday observance. This is what we put in Time magazine. This is the graphic that we put together of the church raping the Constitution. This was back in 1990. I said death. Death in America for refusing to worship according to the dictates of the herd. Can you see why I was laughed to scorn in Jamaica? Be that as it may, what better way to close this talk than to go back to C.S. Lewis? Here's what he had to say, not about the devil, nor about his henchmen, but about theocracy. Here's Lewis. Theocracy is the worst of all governments. If we must have a tyrant, a robber baron is far better than an inquisitor. The baron's cruelty may sometimes sleep. His cupidity at some point may be sated. And since he dimly knows he's doing wrong, he may possibly repent. But the inquisitor, who mistakes his own cruelty and lust of power and fear for the voice of heaven, will torment us infinitely more because he torments us with the approval of his own conscience, and his better impulses appear to him as temptations. Profound. What is Lewis saying? Inquisitors are never satisfied. They always thirst for the next drop of blood. So much for that. Will the last step on the road to that long-awaited prize of American theocracy be San Francisco? I'm not God, so I don't know. Right now, like the Titanic on the one hand, and the attack upon President Trump on the other, San Francisco is just another itch in my soul. But you couldn't pay me to come near that city today. Like President Trump on that stage in Pennsylvania, I believe Fog City, or the city by the bay, or the city of love, whatever you call it, I believe this city of 800,000 souls is in the crosshairs of the deadliest sniper God ever created, Satan himself. He who hath ears to hear, let him hear. Friend, for more on this, feel free to visit our websites, ifeelsure.com and lrltv.org. What will you find there? Well, among other things, you just might be interested in that 1996 page ad we ran in Time magazine about America's coming theocracy. If you'd like your copy of this entire magazine, published way back in 1990, just come to our website, lrltv.org, and order it. May God richly bless you today.